Welcome to the Bare Marriage Podcast. I'm Sheila from ToLoveHonorAndVacuum.com, where we like to strip everything away from marriage that isn't necessary and that just makes everything worse and get to the heart of what marriage intended. And on the last Thursday of every month, we like to do a special Bare Marriage edition where we call it Start Your Engines, where it's mostly for guys.
Yep.
And so I am surrounded by some guys. I have my son-in-law Connor here.
That's me.
And my husband, Keith.
Hey, everybody.
And we are going to talk about, this is actually going to be quite an explosive podcast because, I know Keith always hates it when I put him on the spot.
You don't usually do those.
No. And we'll be telling you some stories, like, once we get into the second half. But we want to start with some happy things.
Yep.
So the Great Sex Rescue is out, guys. Mm-hmm. I've been talking to the women about this for a couple of weeks now, because it came out on March 2nd, but it's out. It's doing great. It was in the New York Times book review. Yep. It's been featured in the Washington Post. It's doing great. And a lot of couples are reading it together and really experiencing a lot of breakthroughs. So it's everything that the evangelical world says about sex that hurts. We go into why it hurts and we try to rescue and reframe that message. So based on our survey of 20,000 women, how you can rock your wife's world in the bedroom.
Mm-hmm. A lot of really good reviews coming in from guys and saying how much it really helped them.
Yeah. And again, we'll be reading some of those later, but I thought that we could start this podcast on maybe more of a somber note. Well, actually, for sure, more of a somber note, because there's been a lot of bad stuff in the news this last week. And I was actually in the Washington Post late last week talking about the Atlanta shooting. I was called by a reporter who knew about my book and just wanted to know my comments on it because, as most of you may know, the shooter said that he was dealing with sex addictions and he was trying to eliminate temptations in his life. Mm-hmm. And so she wanted to know my take on that. And I had a take. I had some thoughts, many thoughts. But I think a lot of it stems from the fact that too often in the Christian world, we have this really toxic way of talking about lust and sex addictions that creates a situation where something like the Atlanta shooter can grow. I want to read you this thing, and then I'm going to let you guys comment on it. But this is something which is on Steve Arterburn's site, and Steve Arterburn wrote Every Man's Battle, and he says in that book that what you're supposed to do is bounce your eyes away from a woman. So if you learn to bounce your eyes and not look at women, then in 6 weeks you should have your lust problem dealt with. Okay? But here is something that he says in this. First step, so the first step in bouncing your eyes is to make a list of your enemies. The first way to start, Fred tells us, and Fred is his co-author in Every Man's Battle, is by making a list of your greatest enemies. These could be lingerie ads, either in a seemingly harmless department store catalog or that Victoria's Secret magazine that your wife left laying around. It could include billboards. It could be TV shows or ads. It may be female joggers, or maybe it's that female coworker who tends to dress a little suggestively, and then there's always the beach. So that's what he said about bouncing your eyes. Does anybody have any thoughts? I do, but I'll leave it open for you guys first.
I mean, I've definitely got some thoughts on that. I mean, first off, you just have to look at the language that's being used there. The idea of identify your enemies, and already you're laying out what I think one of the big problems is, and how this can be tied into things like the Atlanta shooter, is what you're doing here is you're taking women and you are saying, women are the enemy. It's not that I have a problem and I need to work on that myself. It's that women are the enemy and I need to eliminate the enemy wherever I might see them, wherever I might find them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because he actually said female joggers or that female coworker. Like, he's identifying women as the enemy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, it's interesting too. He talks about billboards and magazines and these other objects, like things, pictures, and then a female jogger. Yep. And they're all in the same category.
Yeah.
So to me, that's just very, very... I mean, again, it's objectification. It's objectification of women.
Yeah.
Well, and
that's what we've talked about time and time again. Yeah. This is the issue, is that in the church, we've kind of made male sexual drive synonymous with objectification. And that's the problem, because you either are objectifying a woman or you're having no interaction with her. And it's just so unhealthy.
Yeah, and I mean, I saw, after we first started talking about this on the site and on social media and everything, I saw a lot of women commenting, particularly in response to the whole jogging thing, how outraged they were that a man would see a female jogger and the first thing he would think is, she is an enemy, she is going to tempt me to lust, because of the clothes that she's wearing and everything. And all these women are coming on and saying, I don't jog for the enjoyment of male viewers. I don't jog just to keep my body fit and tight for those who might want to look upon me. Like, I jog, my feet are bruised and blistered and calloused because this is a passion. This is a thing that I want to do with my time. Like, I'm putting in hard work and tears, not just for some man to look at me and go, well, that's not okay, and look away and say, I don't want to interact with that person or see them or notice them as a human being.
Yeah. And like, I know, like, we're not trying to say that any Christian authors support the Atlanta shooter. Like,
No,
obviously not.
Of course not.
And nobody thinks that he read this passage, then he went out and shot them. That's not what I'm saying either. But what I do think is that the ideas that we have, the ideas that we're seeped in, the culture that we're seeped in does shape where our mind goes. And in the evangelical world, one of the big things that we seep men in is this idea that women are dangerous to you, that they pose a danger to you, which is really ironic because it was the guy who posed a danger to the women. It was him who shot all these women up, and one man, I believe, too. Like, we think about it in terms of she is a danger to me. And you objectify her. I was on this podcast yesterday, the MondayChristian.com podcast. I don't know when it's airing. I don't think it's aired yet. And these two men who were in their 30s, I believe, somewhere around there, we're just talking about this whole phenomenon of bouncing your eyes because they had read one of my Twitter threads about the way that in the evangelical world we often talk about women. And they were saying, okay, like, they understand what I'm saying about how you shouldn't objectify women, but what's the alternative? How do you not have to bounce your eyes? And I think part of the issue is that when you grow up in the evangelical world, hearing from the time, like, as soon as you start to get like prepubescence, you start puberty, you hear you can't look on a woman with lust, like sexual attraction is a bad thing and you have to stop it, that it makes you so hypervigilant and it taints all of your interactions with women. Like, one of the things I was explaining to them is, I was talking about you, how, like, at work, you're a pediatrician.
Oh, yeah.
And you often will have, like, medical students or residents that are often female that you'll need to train. Like, they'll be shadowing you for a day. So they'll be at the Emerge, totally busy all morning. And then over lunch, like, you'll go to Dairy Queen or something or wherever. And your attitude is, okay, she needs to brush up on the new asthma regimen or whatever.
Yeah, I think the thing is that whenever I read all these Christian authors who talk about men having this massive struggle all the time with whether they call it lust or their visual nature or whatever, they say men are always struggling all day long with this. It's just like, really? Like, do we really think that every ounce of energy is going into that? Because I spend the whole day with nurses, residents who are predominantly female. My colleagues are predominantly female. The parents who bring in the kids, because I'm a pediatrician, the parents who bring in the kids, predominantly the moms. Like, I'm not struggling to not look at these women in an inappropriate way all day long. That's just not what I'm doing because I don't think of them like that. Because that's just not how I've trained my brain to go. And what I think's happened in the church is really good men who really just want to be honorable have been taught, you will either lust after a woman or not look at her. And they're going, well, then I'm going to not look at her because I don't want to lust after her. And they've never been taught what it means to look at a woman as a human being. And to not have to even have a sexual connotation in any way, shape, or form. And I've heard people say that I'm crazy, that I'm a unicorn or stuff like that, But I've talked to, like, a lot of other guys, and I've even talked to some of my guys who are not Christian friends, and they're like, are you kidding me? Like, of course, no one thinks like that. It's very sad. Because there's a much healthier way to do it if we just taught people how to see women as people. It's just...
And I think when you're growing up in this culture that makes women past a certain age, like when you're as a male past a certain age, makes women scary and makes women something you need to be careful around, I think it's very difficult to then see them as just people, see them as friends, which I think then leads back into that problem of now they're scary. Because growing up, I was an atheist all the time I was going through high school. And I had this tight-knit group of maybe somewhere between 15 and 20 friends. And about half of them were women. And the whole time going through, with most of them, there would be maybe, a couple of times where I would think about them and I'd think, they are quite pretty. I wonder if I could see myself dating them, or I might think something like that. But 99.9% of my interacting with these girls day after day after day in classes, at lunch break, everything like that, 99.9% of my interactions with them were just as friends. They were just like my guy friends. We were just friends who knew each other and were spending time together. And there was none of this weird, but see, you're a friend, but you're different. Because... you're not one of the guys, so I do need to be careful around you. There wasn't that idea of that. And so I think, when you grow up in a culture that says, actually, you probably can't be like that because you know what'll happen.
Then no wonder it does. And I guess that's what I want. That's what I want guys to understand. Because there's a lot of guys who really don't want to do this bouncing your eyes. But they don't see the alternative because, one guy said to me, whenever I'm one-on-one with a woman, I don't know how to act. I can't help but think of it in sexual terms. And I guess what I just want to say to the men is, I understand that's the way you feel. And I'm not debating that you feel that way. I totally believe you feel that way. But I just want you to know that's not universal or normal. Because I think if guys can realize that most of the world doesn't actually interact that way. We're not saying something that's weird. I think that the Christian model or the evangelical model is actually what's weird, because in the secular world, people just relate as people. And it is quite normal. And so maybe if guys could understand this is normal, then maybe we could get past it. I think it's that inability to see women as anything other than sexual that's the problem. You even said the most paranoid that you've ever been.
Oh yeah, well, after I read Everyman's Battle, that's the only time I ever had a struggle with lust, because now every interaction I had with a woman was, I don't want to lust after her. I went into the conference, I went into the thing going, I can't do this. And it was just crazy. And I read the book because I wanted to be a good Christian man. I wanted to be pure in my thought life, which is what it promised it would do. And it just made me a nervous wreck because everything became about not lusting. And it's when I finally just said, forget it, and didn't worry about it, then I actually had less of a problem because I didn't have this hyper vigilant. It's the way I explain it is there's something you may say, people have this worry that they're gonna jump in front of a subway train or something like that, right? And if you keep thinking about it, it's gonna give you distress. But if you just I'm not gonna think about that anymore, and just don't let it be in your brain anymore. I don't know if that makes sense. If you know what I'm talking about.
It does. Yeah, what you're referring to is what most people experience at some point or another, but then when it becomes a problem and it becomes obsessive compulsive disorder is when you have those intrusive thoughts and you feel like, because I'm having these thoughts, it means I am going to jump in front of this train. And so I need to stay away from trains. And that's where you start to delve into OCD territory, because it's normal to have the odd thought pop into your head. We're not policing our thoughts all the time. It's not healthy to do so. But it's when you start to think, because I saw this woman, because I noticed that she was attractive, because I had a fleeting moment of attraction towards her, that means I'm going to act on this in a bad, sinful, unhealthy way, or even in my thoughts, I now have to go forward from here and do unhealthy things in my thoughts toward this woman. That's not true. That's not healthy. And believing that that is true is the source of a lot of unhealthiness. I was going to say, I'm quite glad I never did end up reading Everyman's Battle or any of those books when I became a Christian, because for a while after becoming a Christian, I had heard of the concept of bounce your eyes, but I actually thought that I believed that and supported it because I'd heard of the concept, and I'm like, oh yeah, that's what I do. Because I will see a woman, and I will notice, if I'm on the bus or on the subway or whatever else, I might see a woman, and I might think, yeah, she's attractive, and then go, I'm in a relationship, or I'm not dating that woman, she's a person, she has the right to her own life, so there's nothing really more for me to do with this thought. I'm not going to stare at her, because what is my justification for staring? I'm just going to, look elsewhere, think about other things. Oh, look at that, passing by. And so I thought, I bounce my eyes. I'm a big proponent of that. And then learning more about what's actually being talked about there, I'm like, oh, no, what the heck? No, I don't do that at all. That's gross.
But I do hope that we can have these conversations, because that's just what we want to do with the Great Sex Rescue too, is to change the evangelical conversation about sex so that this stuff isn't so weird and toxic, and so we can just understand what normal, healthy relationships look like. So with that being said, I do want to do a shout out to some patrons. So we started a Patreon account. Yay! And the Patreon account is not to support me. It's not to support this podcast. This podcast is already fully funded from the sale of courses and products from my website. And that pays for your salary, so it's not to support you either. The Patreon account, what it is it's to help us get our message from the Great Sex Rescue out even further. So it's going to be funding Joanna, who's going to do peer-reviewed research and get us in some academic journals, and Rebecca, who's going to be doing some more social media channels that aren't monetized and don't have an ability to be monetized right now, just so that we can talk about this stuff more. And we have some amazing patrons who came on board. You can join us. We will have a link to how you can sign up to support, even for as little as like $5 a month. It helps us so much. There's going to be a Facebook group. There'll be some unfiltered podcasts that Rebecca does. It'll be awesome. And Becca Unfiltered is quite the thing to behold. So thank you to Grant and to Amber and Phil and Elizabeth who are supporting us at that top tier, so they get a shout out on a podcast. So thank you so much for your support, and to everybody else too. And we will put a link on how you can support us and support getting our peer-reviewed research out there. Speaking of messages that can get distorted, I do not want to talk about what we're about to talk about, but we have to talk about what we're about to talk about. I was not planning on talking about this. I actually had a really big podcast planned for today, which we're probably going to do next month, on, guys, do you know the messages that your wife is reading in marriage books? Mm-hmm. And I wanted to go through that. But last week, Emerson Eggerichs, the author of Love and Respect, started putting copyright violations on YouTube and Twitter on some places where I looked at a sermon that he did at Houston's First Baptist Church, and I found some very problematic things in it. And so I created a video showing clips of him talking and showing what was problematic about that. Those videos have been taken down and they've been taken off of Twitter, but I've decided that I would like to revisit this in a way that is absolutely fair use, which we will talk about at the end of this podcast, why it is fair use. But you are allowed to critique people. Mm-hmm. I know that Emerson Eggerichs does not want me talking about this because he's gone out of his way to try to get us to be silent. And I just want to remind everybody of something from Acts chapter 5, verses 33 to 39. When the Sanhedrin is meeting and they are debating what to do about the apostles who are preaching stuff they don't like. And I'm going to read this to you in the NIV. When they heard this, meaning the Pharisees, they were furious and wanted to put the apostles to death. But a Pharisee named Gamaliel, how do you say that? Gamaliel? Okay, but a Pharisee named Gamaliel, a teacher of the law, who was honored by all the people, stood up in the Sanhedrin and ordered that the men be put outside for a little while. Then he addressed the Sanhedrin. Men of Israel, consider carefully what you intend to do to these men. Some time ago, Theudas appeared, claiming to be somebody, and about 400 men rallied to him. He was killed, and his followers were dispersed, and it all came to nothing. After him, Judas the Galilean appeared in the days of the census and led a band of people in a revolt. He too was killed, and all his followers were scattered. Therefore, in the present case, I advise you, leave these men alone, let them go. For if their purpose or activity is of human origin, it will fail. But if it is from God, you will not be able to stop these men. You will only find yourselves fighting against God. So I just want to say, if we are not of God, if what we're saying is wrong, then there's nothing to worry about. Like, leave us alone. But if we are of God, you are only going to find yourself fighting against God. You know, if you disagree with us, if people disagree with what we're saying, if people disagree with the Great Sex Rescue, then talk about it. Mm-hmm. You know, write your own posts about it. Write your own books about it.
Say what's wrong with it.
We even said in the Great Sex Rescue, we don't want to be the end of the conversation. We want to talk about this stuff.
Yeah, let's not be afraid of discourse.
Yeah. But when you're just simply trying to shut us up, that shows us what you really think about your own arguments. Because if people are secure in their arguments, they would not be afraid to make them. Mm-hmm. And they would stop shutting other people down. We just want to say, like, we're not going to be shut down. And when people try to do that to us, we will just simply talk all the louder.
And the thing is that you're getting an audience because people are saying, finally someone is saying the things that I've been thinking. We're not going to stop saying that when people are saying, thank you for finally speaking up for us.
Yep. So last week this happened, and it was in the middle of our launch. I was doing 2 to 3 interviews a day for other people's podcasts. I'm still doing that. I have 2 interviews today. And so I didn't have time to deal with it. And so I said to Connor, hey, Connor, could you please watch these 2 sermons that Emerson Eggerichs gave at Houston's First Baptist Church in October of 2019, which were the sermons that I originally critiqued, and tell me what you think of them, and write a post.
And boy, did I watch those videos.
Yes. And so we're going to walk through those videos and show you some of the clips. And as per fair use, we will be providing some critique and some commentary, which is transformative, which is the first principle of fair use, which allows you to use people's clips. Okay, why don't you introduce this? So the first thing that you did, Connor, is you said, hey, you know, people often criticize me because I don't give I don't give his caveats.
That's when you originally released this video, you know, there was all the criticism about, oh, well, you're taking him out of context, and oh, well, he actually does address these things you're saying he doesn't address. He addresses them, you know, in this blog post that he wrote or in his book, if you just read his book. And a lot of people saying, clearly, you did not watch through all of the videos. You don't know what you're talking about. And so going into this, I was like, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to watch the heck out of those videos. And then I'm going to put in so much context that it is clear I have seen way more of those videos than I ever wanted to. Because my philosophy is, going into this to set up the beginning of it, my philosophy is I'm going to give you, or this thing, as much credit as I possibly can. So that when people see how little credit that is, that speaks louder than if I'd tried to just barge through, make my point, and not give some caveats and some defenses. So the very first thing that I do in this post is I say, you know, people say Sheila hasn't included the caveats he gave. So going through, first thing I want to do is take a look at where are all the places that he did say something that could be considered a disclaimer about abusive or unhealthy or toxic relationships. Because the initial accusation was he did not address these things properly and did so in a way that could enable them.
Let's take a look at the first clip.
Unless it's an evil, unless your husband's saying, hey, I've been thinking about selling the kids for our cocaine habit. That's evil. That's immoral. That's illegal. That's, you know.
So don't sell your kids for a cocaine habit.
Yeah, so the first thing that he says is he's saying, don't see arguments in terms of black and white. One of you has to be wrong, one of you has to be right, unless you're talking about evil, unless your husband is saying, let's sell the kids for our cocaine addiction. So I'm like, you know what? That's kind of a disclaimer.
Okay.
So we'll put that in there. Let's move on. Let's take a look at the second thing he says.
But we're fearful that if we do the loving or respectful thing, that they'll take advantage of it. Or some women think, well, you're just saying be nice. I've tried being nice. I'm not talking about being nice. It's interesting how some quickly dismiss what this is saying. It means you courageously and respectfully speak the truth. Ananias and Sapphira, Peter said you win a disobedient husband through your respectful behavior. Some people think you just got to give men license. No, because it was Ananias and Sapphira in Acts 5 who both lost their lives. They were first post-Pentecost discipline. They received the Holy Spirit, but they lied to the Holy Spirit and lied to Peter. Peter, who penned 1 Peter 3, says to Ananias, why did you lie? And he dies. And then Sapphira, he didn't say, oh, Sapphira, you know, you're a dutiful wife. You respected your husband. You went along with the lie. That's what I teach the church, so you get to go. No, she lost her life. There are boundaries, and you don't step into sin or evil. Been preaching that for 20 years. But some take the superficial view and somehow say you're respecting bad behavior, you're being nice. No, I talk what that means. But here's the deal. You can't be disrespectful to motivate love, and you can't be unloving to motivate respect.
All right, so the second clip, he's saying that his books are not just talking about being nice, because that's something that some people come away feeling, is that they just need to let their husbands walk over them, just let him do whatever. And he's saying, I'm not saying that in my books. I am saying that you need to boldly and bravely and courageously speak the truth, which is good. Okay, great, he's addressing that. But wait, then he only brings up the context of you do not go along with whatever your husband says so that you step into evil and sin along with him. Okay, but then that still doesn't cover situations where the woman is the victim of the sin that's going on.
Yeah,
Is
like,
she
am I allowed to speak up
Yeah.
if the evil's being done against me?
And is that all she's allowed to do? Is all she's allowed to do just speak up and courageously speak up the truth and say, hey, I don't think you should be doing that, and then hope that he listens? It's unclear. And so let's move on to our third clip, our third caveat that he gives.
Rather than having this mature perspective, neither one of us are wrong, we're just different. That this is not a moral issue that we're talking about. These are what I call the pink and blue differences in the gray areas of life that must not be escalated to black and white matters. It's just common issue. There's not moral issues here. If there are, then that's not my frame of reference. He's betraying you, he's beating the kid. We're not talking about that. We're talking about these day in and day out tensions between people of goodwill.
All right, so third clip.
What I noticed, can I just jump in on the very first thing he said was, we're not talking about, we're not talking about someone doing something wrong. But what if someone is doing something wrong? Mm-hmm. Like, he doesn't ever give room to the fact that somebody might actually be doing something wrong.
What he's saying here is he's saying that he's actually not, this talk isn't supposed to address those situations where there are moral issues, where the husband is betraying or beating the kids. His book, his talks...
He caught himself. He said beating the kid, and then he stopped. And I wondered if it's because he realized that you don't say things like that. That's what I was thinking as a pediatrician.
Yeah.
You don't throw that out there like...
Yeah.
That's a typical evil thing that, come on.
I mean, the number of times
bothered
throughout
me.
these
It's
videos
such
that
an
he comes very close to saying something and then just doesn't. It's not something I'm going to comment on. I'm not going to comment on his intentions or anything, but let's just get right into the point. He's saying there are no moral issues here. His teachings are not supposed to cover moral issues. So what that means is that the situations he talks about, we can consider to be normal, healthy situations. Because if they were unhealthy, if they were like big moral issues, then his advice doesn't apply. He's not talking about those. So keep that in mind.
Yes.
The situations he's talking about are healthy, non-moral issues.
Where two people have goodwill.
So
everything on the sermon that he's talking about is two people with
he
goodwill.
He talks a lot about men and women of goodwill.
Okay.
And that's why people say to you, of course he doesn't condone abuse. He says all these things. Mm-hmm. He means only when it's a good, healthy situation.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And that's the point he
And as we're going to get into, there's a problem. But finally, let's look at this fourth point that he makes here.
And the wisdom of God is the foolishness of the world. The world said it's foolish to put on love toward a disrespectful woman. It's foolish to put on respect toward an unloving man. Not talking about being in harm's way. You get out of harm's way. Talking about two goodwill people who don't like each other because they've been spinning on the crazy cycle. And the world would say, if you do that, you're a fool. And God says, you are the epitome of wisdom to me.
All right, so fourth point, again, he's saying his teachings are not about harm's way. He's saying he condones getting out of harm's way. So again, these situations we're talking about, they're not moral issues. They're assuming you're not in harm's way. And if that's the case, then his teachings, he is saying, apply and are fine.
So he's setting this up. He's setting it up that everything else in the sermon is about, or these two sermons which go back to back. I think one was morning, one was evening or something like that. But everything else in these sermons is not about people being in harm's way. It involves two people having goodwill. He's not saying that you should follow a husband into sin, and he's not saying you should sell your kids for a coke habit.
That's correct.
Okay, good. So we've got it.
All right. So we've laid out our baseline. We've established what he is saying in this video. Now, before we move on, another important point that I want to make is we are just talking about this video in its own context. We're not talking about whether he's addressed these things in other blog posts or in his book, because you can't assume when you put something out that people are going to consume all of the media, all of the information you have out there. A lot of people are going to be viewing this video as is, and even if they've read the other stuff, if this provides a conflicting message or it muddies the water of what's okay and what is not okay, what is evil, abusive, moral, harmful, then that's still an issue, and that is why we are sitting down here right now talking about this. Let's move on.
But as I got in on this, I realized there's some controversy. Women say, well, Emerson, I don't feel any respect for him. It'd be hypocritical for me to show respect if I don't feel it, and I know you don't want to be a hypocrite. And everybody says that respect must be earned. He hasn't earned it, doesn't deserve it. He's not as loving as me. I'm not going to give it to him until he's more loving. And the dictionary says you show respect to your superiors. He's not superior to me. I'm not inferior to him. I'm not going to be treated like a doormat. I'm certainly not going to walk on eggshells. Hey, you know what? I really think the profile on him on narcissism is correct, and you're asking me to feed his ego narcissism, and I'm simply not going to do that. I'm not going to give him a license to do whatever he wants to do. Come with the poems, just worship the guy. I'm not going to do that. I certainly am not going to be following what I think is your real agenda here, and that's to return to male patriarchy. That's really what you're all about, male patriarchy, and I certainly am not going to subject myself to emotional abuse. But other than these things, I'm really open to hearing what you have to say about this. How many of you have sons? Would you raise your hands? What I just went through is what I call the mantra, and your sweet daughter-in-law, who will be love itself, is going to say every one of the things that I just said to your boy, probably within the first year of the marriage. And he's just going to shut down.
All right, so...
Well, that's a little bit horrifying and condescending. The body language was quite telling.
So this is one of the clips that Sheila, you had in your original video that you talked about. I believe it was the first clip that you had. And so what we have right here, and this is right at the beginning of this first presentation. And so what we have here is this is the only other place that he is bringing up some legitimate, genuine concerns that people have had with his writing in the past. You know, bringing up things like narcissism and abuse and all of these other things. And he brings them up in a mocking, feminine voice, pretending to be a feminist, and then going on this big tirade and pausing for laughter.
And that was just floored me.
Yeah.
It's like the last thing he said at the end, before the laughter was, and I'm certainly not going to subject myself to abuse, but other than that, I'm open to hearing what you have to say.
Yeah.
Why is it funny to say, I'm not going to subject myself to abuse, but I'm open to hearing what you have to say? In what universe is that funny? They shouldn't open themselves up to abuse.
Yeah.
But he makes it why would that be a bad thing for a person to say? That's crazy.
Well, and the reason is because as we get later into this clip, he then starts talking about how your sweet, brave, beautiful, honorable son is going to be victimized by this kind of talk from your daughter-in-law. And, you know, it won't be her fault. It'll just be what she's learned. But then she will take these complaints about your innocent, sweet boy. She'll label him a narcissist. She'll say he's an abuser. And she'll go out onto social media, which, as we all know, is just filled with these female trolls just going about trying to blame everything on men, which is what he goes on to say in the rest of the clip. And so what we have here is, regardless of what Emerson thinks he's saying, regardless of what he's trying to say, a big message for a lot of people here is going to be, if I speak up about these concerns, I'm unfairly victimizing my husband. He's a good man, and I'm a troll.
And, you know, I want people to think about sermons this way when it comes to abuse. There's 3 different things a sermon can do when it comes to abuse. The first is it can help people recognize when you're being abused and tell people to get help. The second is it just says nothing about abuse at all and just talks about marriage in general with no mention of abuse. And the third is that it can actually prime people to disregard abuse accusations and to think abuse isn't real.
So in this case, he talks about narcissism and abuse in this little diatribe he does. And the thing to me is that what he's basically saying is this is a weapon that women use to keep men down.
Yeah.
Saying that calling men narcissists and calling men abusive is a weapon that women use to keep them down. At no point does he ever talk about the fact that there are narcissists and abusers out there.
Yes.
And so maybe there is a young man somewhere who is being unfairly labeled that way. And that would be horrible. And we would never want that to happen. But we do know that there are men out there who deserve those labels, who are getting a free pass because people are thinking it's my fault. We know the cycle of abuse. Women blame themselves for the problems that are going on in the relationship. This sermon does nothing to tell those poor women, you are in a bad situation. You need to get out of that bad situation.
And the other thing it does is it primes everybody who's sitting in that audience to laugh at someone who comes and talks about abuse. Okay, let's go on to the next one here.
All right, let's move right on along.
them. 85, think bell curve, 15% don't. My mother withdrew, but 85% of the men withdraw and Stonewall. But they were monitoring the heartbeats. And men, during conflicted moments maritally, their heartbeats get to 99 beats per minute. He looks stoic, but his heartbeats are in warrior mode. The woman looks like she's a flamethrower. She's out of control. Her heartbeats are normal. If the husband just says, I'm sorry, and humiliate, I'm sorry, I'm wrong, will you forgive me? She'll go, well, I'm wrong too. I was bad. I shouldn't have really said what I did. I'm sorry too. Will you forgive? Immediate, axiomatic, kicking into the I'm sorry as well. She doesn't want to control you. She's trying to connect. And once there's this apology, heartfelt, she will immediately be there because that's her goal. That's why she's not out of control. She looks like it. That's why you say, I'm sorry. She'll immediately stop. But he can't immediately stop because his heartbeats are at 99 beats per minute. He's felt dishonored and he has to calm down. So he walks away out of honor. Because that's what we do as men. Our best buddies, we get in heated moments. We can get volatile. So we have to protect the relationship. The relationship is more important than the issue on the table. So then we exit because it's honorable. But in the world of intimacy, it's called unloving and abusive. Your son will be called abusive as he walks away to calm down. And he'll be completely blown away by this.
Don't you love that smile at the end? That smirk. Your son will be called abusive as he walks away and calms down.
Mm-hmm. Now, I want to just say a quick thing about this and then show you two other clips from this video that tie in pretty closely. First thing I want to say is, as we see, he's bringing up again how your sons are going to be the victims. Your sons are going to be called abusive by your daughters-in-law. And he uses this language a lot. He talks about your sons, and he talks about your daughter-in-laws and how they are going to hurt your sons' feelings. But it's this, he has these pauses for emotional gravitas, like, isn't that a shame? Your son. So.
But the men, why were these men withdrawing? Well, remember, as I said today, they were measuring the BPMs, the beats per minute of the heart. And during these conflicted moments, the men's heartbeats got to 99 beats per minute. That's warrior mode. So when a man is in that kind of state, he has to calm down. And he knows if he continues to have this face-to-face heated fellowship, it's going to escalate. And he doesn't want it to escalate because men know physiologically they can lose that. So they have to withdraw because that's honorable. Among us as men, the honor code dominates. So when we're in heated moments with our best buddy, we drop it, forget it, and we exit because the relationship exceeds this issue on the table. You are more important to me than this topic. And when we have that moment, my best friend doesn't go, Emerson, you come back and talk to me. He's not in my face because he's not insecure about this.
And the third clip here.
This is why he doesn't apologize to you. Why should he say he's sorry for doing the honorable thing on the heels of what he perceives to be disrespect from you over something that he didn't feel was unloving? And then we label him egotistical and arrogant because he never says he's sorry. You don't say you're sorry in the man's world for doing the honorable thing when you want to just really go after your best buddy. Why would you apologize for that? But the culture of intimacy is pink in this culture. So it dominates. And the females are telling us why men do what they do. They're defining who men are.
Okay. So I want to unpack a little bit here, and then I want to talk about it, and I want to hear from you two about what we've seen here. So we've just seen three clips, all three of which he is talking about this process of stonewalling and, how men were honorable. Our heart rates get elevated. He talks about that so much. Twice he brings up warrior mode, thinking like fighting, our heartbeats go into warrior mode physiologically.
I don't remember learning about warrior mode in medical school.
Or psychology.
Yeah.
And so,
anyway, whatever.
So he talks about these things, and he talks about how men will walk away because it's the honorable thing, and why. And all three times he switches from talking about the spouse, and he switches to talking with a guy buddy. And in all three clips, when he's talking about how heated he gets, he raises his fists and he shakes them, and he'll clench his jaw. And in the third clip, he's even starts to get heated. And he's like, "Why would I apologize for doing the honorable thing and walking away when what I really want to do is get after my best friend?" And it's like, okay, again, I'm not going to speak to what Emerson's intentions are if he's trying to like narrowly avoid actually saying get physical and, implicating domestic violence. I'm not going to make those speculations. I'm not going to say I think that's what's happening here. But his body language is going to communicate to a lot of viewers, either consciously or unconsciously, that when you get into a conflict, your man has a choice. He can either stick around and he will very likely get violent, get physical, hit you. Emerson is showing us when men get heated, they can just lose it, as he says, or they can do the honorable thing and walk away. So your man can either hit you or get violent, or he can walk away. Let's talk about that. I want to hear what you guys think.
What I find interesting too is the gaslighting that's going on here, because what he's saying is, you women who think that your husband is being mean to you, don't you understand he's actually being honorable? So imagine that you're in the congregation and you are someone who's being abused. What you're hearing is, if you think he's abusive, he's not. He's actually honorable.
Yeah, I got in his face and I wouldn't let him go away and calm down.
Yeah.
And so it's my fault that he hit
He
me.
was trying to make the honorable choice by walking away, because naturally, if he didn't, he was going to hit me. I chased after him. That's my mistake. That's on me. He is an honorable man because he tried to walk away. Him hitting me doesn't change that he is a good-willed, honorable man. It's my fault for chasing after him.
It would be so easy for a woman in an abusive situation to get that exactly
So
out of
easy
what he
to pull
said.
that out of
And
there.
what he said at one point was, why would he apologize for doing what he thought was the honorable thing? And look, I'm going to tell you why he would apologize, because it was wrong. Because when we got married, I was a young man and I had a temper. I grew up in a house full of boys, and we were rough, and we were physical with each other, because boys are like that sometimes. And you grew up an only child in a very quiet home. And so the first time we got into a fight, I got mad and I stormed out of the house.
Yeah.
And you were terrified.
Yeah.
This is just me just blowing off steam, exactly like Emerson is talking about. I just wanted to de-escalate the situation. I had to get out of here. So I left. But here's the deal. That hurt you. It scared you. It made you feel unsafe. And I said, well, then I better learn to not be like that then. Because I don't want you to feel unsafe. I don't want you to feel afraid. I don't want you to feel like you're in jeopardy, or like I don't love you, or any of those kind of things. I don't want you to feel that. So I better learn to control my temper. That's called maturity. And yeah, I had a bad temper when I was a young person, but as I've gotten older, I've gotten better at that. Yeah. And even now, sometimes you get mad and you say, I need some time to think. I'm heated up now. Let's not go on. But you don't use that as an excuse to say every single time we fight, I'm just going to go away and never solve the issue, which is what stonewalling actually is.
Yeah, and can I know you said that we were going to stick to the video. I want to get off the video just for a minute. When you look at Love and Respect, he doesn't have a lot of sources. He doesn't have a lot of footnotes in his book, Love and Respect. The one peer-reviewed source that he uses, or the one source that he uses that actually has some credit in the community, in the marriage community, is John Gottman.
Yeah.
Okay, so he quotes John Gottman quite a bit. John Gottman calls stonewalling one of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. Yes. John Gottman is very clear that stonewalling is not honorable. Stonewalling is what you do when you want to destroy your marriage.
Absolutely.
And so here, Emerson Eggerichs uses Gottman to say he agrees with me in Love and Respect, when actually Gottman himself talks against so much of what Emerson Eggerichs has in Love and Respect.
Because there's a very big difference between saying, look, sweetheart, this is obviously important to you, but I have a different opinion and it's important to me and I'm really heated right now. Can we take 10 minutes or an hour, or can we go to sleep and talk about it tomorrow? Or can we put this on the back burner and deal with it later? That's healthy. That's honorable. Walking away from making it a bigger situation. But you're going to come back to it and finish the conversation. Yeah. Stonewalling is when you just, every time a person brings something up, you just say, nope, we're not talking about that, and you don't let the conversation
go. And I
go.
have to say, as a woman, watching his body language, that is scary. That is really intimidating.
Yeah. And that was the thing is about us when we first got married, is you told me you were scared. And the first thought I thought was, oh my gosh, yeah, if I were a woman and my husband did that to me, then oh my gosh, that would be terrifying. Yeah. And so that I wanted to be different because that. Yeah. I don't want to be different because, as Emerson Eggerichs implies, the pink world has pinkified me and told me how I'm supposed to be a man. I want to be that way because it's a good thing to be in control of your own emotions, to be in control of your own mind.
Now, there are a couple of things I need to say here. First is that, again, let's give him all the credit we can. He does say the point of letting a man walk away is not for him to stay away and never address the situation.
Oh, okay.
He should say,
Good.
Okay, I'm going to leave for 15 minutes, and then I'm going to come back, and we can talk about it for 15 minutes. Not 16, not 17, 15, not 15 hours, 15 minutes.
Is that what he says?
That's what he says. Just about word for word. Not 16,
So
not 17, 15
I'm going to come
minutes.
back and I'm going to tell you how long we're going to talk about this.
Yeah.
Until you finally agree with me.
Yeah.
That's the way that I would take that.
Yeah, and so I do need to get out there. He does say he's not telling men, you can just walk away from any confrontation forever. He does say that. But now I need to say a couple of other things, and that's first, Keith, can you ask me how many times I have gotten into a heated situation with my wife or with any of my friends of any kind where I've just really wanted to get at them?
So I'm not the person you want to ask that question to because your wife's my daughter, so it better be zero.
That's why I do want you to answer that question. Keith.
Like, okay, well, honestly, answer me, Connor. Like,
Okay.
how many times have you got into a heated situation with my daughter that you just were so angry you had to walk away?
With your daughter, 0 times. With anyone else in my life, as a trained black belt, 0 times. I have never punched, nor have I even really felt like I was going to punch someone in a situation where I got heated. I've never felt like, you know what? I need to take a quick breather from this because, I'm just like, I'm physiologically, and I'll just lose it. I've never been there. Most of my friends, I don't think, have ever been there. That is not, in my opinion, a completely universally male thing.
Well, and that's the thing is, I have been there. Because when I was young, I was immature and I did act that way. I had a lot of anger issues and I had quite a temper, as we said earlier, right? But I saw that as something I needed to work on. I saw it as something that was immaturity. I didn't see it as, I'm male, that's the way men are. And you know what? If I had been taught when I was 18, 19, 20 years old, that's the way men are, I wouldn't have invested the time and energy to control my temper because I would have thought there's no point because that's the way men are. And it's not true.
Yeah.
I was a real hothead as a young man and I'm actually fairly calm now.
Yeah.
I mean,
I have never, even when you used to slam doors, I was never scared you were going to hit me.
No.
Like I've never felt like you were, I just find this whole thing that this is what all men are like. I think I've only ever been with one man who was like that in my entire life. That I felt like was like that. Like that is not normal.
Yeah. But in these videos, Emerson talks about how men are hardwired a certain way, and this is how God designed them. And it's about helping women understand that this is how men are. And he talks in a lot of general terms. Men are honorable. With men, the honor code rules. The honor code dominates. Men will need to walk away because men, their heart races. Like, this doesn't speak about me. This doesn't speak about most of the people that I know. This doesn't speak about people who maybe once were like that, but now have grown and matured beyond that. So if all of the healthy people I know in my life, if this doesn't apply to them, who is it supposed to be applying to? Last thing I want to say is in terms of my own marriage, there have been times where I have wanted to or where I have walked away from a conflict, and it's been one of two situations. Earlier on in the marriage, I would want to walk away and get some space where I would communicate, listen, it seems like we're not really making any progress on this issue right now. It seems like neither of us really know how to communicate what it is that we want, and I think I would really just like a little bit of time to go for a walk, calm down, collect my thoughts and just really see if I can figure out on my own what's going on here on my end, and that would help me. We normally ended up just sitting down and talking through it anyways. And then the only other situation in which I've gone away to have some private time is later on in the marriage. We would sit down and we would have the discussion, we would have the argument, and then after that I would say, okay, I feel like we've come to a good place. How do you feel? And she would say, I feel like we've come to a good place, to an understanding as well. I'd say, great. I would really just love now that I feel we're okay, I would love to just go for a walk and just, get some fresh air and just move into a happier headspace so that then I can come back and just be ready to lie down in bed and watch an episode of Netflix. If we went right now, I'd probably still have the last little bits of that fight, maybe bouncing around in my head thinking, did I do or say the right thing? If I could just have a little bit of time to just transition into a better place. And it's never been about anger. or being worried what I might do. It's what is productive, or what do I need to recharge and move into something that's more productive now.
Right. So having a sermon where you talk about how all men get anger to the point where they have to walk away is just problematic. Now, I do want to say, if you do have anger so much that you're scared you're going to hit someone, you should walk away.
Absolutely. And you should seek help.
Yes,
and you should not consider that normal.
And you should apologize.
Yes.
And you should apologize for that.
And it's not honorable. It means you have serious issues. Okay, next clip.
Now, before we play this next clip, I do just want to mention, as a trigger warning for anyone, that this is where Emerson goes on to recount a tale of domestic assault and attempted murder in his own family when he was a kid. So he doesn't go into great detail, nor will we, especially since none of us were there. We don't know the situations. We're not going to speculate anything about his family. But I do want to just lay it out there that is what's coming up just now.
So let's be honest about the dynamics. My mother was wounded. My dad attempted to strangle my mother, and my dad wounded my mother. She just shut down and separated for 5 years. We later came to Christ my freshman year at Wheaton. I'd come to Christ at 16 in a military school, which I was sent to for 5 years because of family issues. But what I saw then is this crazy cycle, and we get on that. And there is this moment where we've all got to come to a place where we ask ourselves, is my wife really trying to diss me? Is that really her mission, or is she a good-willed woman who's reacting because I said or did something earlier that felt unloving to her? And is my husband really trying to be unloving when he would die for me if I don't kill him first? Is he really unloving, or did I say or do something earlier that was disrespectful?
And now, before I hear from you guys, let me just lay out the context. This is in the middle of him introducing his concept of the crazy cycle, where women will sometimes act disrespectfully because they feel they have been treated unlovingly, or men will act unlovingly because they feel they've been treated disrespectfully, and then it will turn into a vicious cycle. So in the context of explaining, here's a term I have, the crazy cycle, here's a story from my family. I saw the crazy cycle here. This is a normal thing that happens in relationships. He says in several times in the video that it happens in his relationship even now, like generally about once a week or three times a month. Go.
Well, okay, so I didn't see the whole sermon. I'm just watching these clips, right? Mm-hmm. But the first thing is that was clearly abuse. That was an attempted murder.
Yeah.
If you strangle somebody.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Strangulation is to kill through the constriction of the breath.
Yeah. So how can you ever go from that to asking the question, is my husband really unloving, or is he just feeling disrespected? Like, in what universe does that next question you ask? Mm-hmm. And why does he say he would die for you if you don't kill him first? Mm-hmm. Like, the person who was just being killed a second ago was the woman. How do we suddenly flip to she's going to kill him? Like, what happened there?
And he talks so much in this video, taking any chance he can to bring up, like, every one of you in here, your husbands would die for you without a hesitation. If Al-Qaeda burst in here, every man in the room would jump onto their wives and protect them with their bodies. Or, is my husband who would die for me if I don't kill him first really being unloving? He talks so much about how, obviously, every man would die for his wife because all men are honorable. And it's that other issue with generalization there. Mm-hmm. Because that's not true for a lot of people.
But also, I just want to say that, and I might have the stat wrong, but I don't think I do. I will look it up and put it in the notes if I did get it wrong. But once you choke someone, there's now a 7 times greater chance you will murder them.
Because people are murdered in marriage.
That
happens.
Yes, and there's a domestic violence checklist that police use, that domestic violence shelters use to assess your risk. And being choked is one of the big risk factors that you will actually be killed. Mm-hmm. And so this is not just a tiny thing that he has mentioned. This is something that is huge.
Yeah.
And for him to not couch it in terms of abuse or in terms of something that the police need to be called for, and perhaps the police were called in this situation. We don't know. But he never says to people in the congregation, hey, if anyone ever tries to choke you, that is really dangerous. You need to call the police. That is not a safe situation. Instead, he uses it as an example of the crazy cycle, which he goes through 3 times a month.
And now, again, I want to point out, he is very careful, it seems, not to actually say, here's what happened to my mom and dad. My dad specifically should have asked if his wife was being unloving, and my mom specifically should have asked if my dad was being unloving. He didn't specifically tie that in, but it is the very next thing he says. Here's a crazy cycle. Everyone goes through it. This is part of a normal marriage. It's part of my marriage. My dad tried to kill my mom. That was a crazy cycle. In a crazy cycle, a man needs to ask this, a woman needs to ask this. So yeah, he doesn't explicitly say...
And it's not enough to say, well, of course I didn't mean that.
Right.
Because there are people in your audience who are going through that. I mean, domestic abuse is rampant. And it needs to stop. We need to call it what it is. And we need to say, this is absolutely wrong. We need to actually be anticipating. And what I'm saying, could it be used in an abusive situation by a man to weaponize it against his wife? We need to be careful that we don't put ammunition into those men's hands.
Yeah, and you know
because,
what you just
because
said?
Not all men are like that. And Emerson Eggerichs is implying that anyone who speaks out against men who are like that is against all men. I'm a man. I'm not against all men.
Yeah.
I don't think most men are abusers.
Yeah.
But I think that there's some are. We know some are. And we need to stop them. And the way we stop them is by saying, this is not acceptable. You don't talk about this kind of stuff like it's no big deal.
Yeah.
You say, this is huge, and this doesn't happen. And if you have anger problems, you deal with them, and you mature, and you grow up.
Yeah.
That's the way you deal with it.
And you know what you said there? You said we need to call it what it is. And this is the big point that I made in the blog post, and that I'm going to make here again, is as I've laid out, he said in the beginning of what I've talked about, he is not talking about harmful or abusive or evil situations. What he is talking about, the advice he is giving, is for healthy, normal situations that don't have moral issues, don't have evil issues, don't have harm involved. And then he gives the implication that your man will probably hit you if he doesn't do the honorable thing and walk away. And he gives this example of this horrible thing happening in his family and that being part of a crazy cycle, which is in his teaching. And so you can't say, I'm not talking about harm's way. You get out of harm's way. What I'm talking about here is not that. And then talk about these kinds of situations, because what that communicates to the viewer, what that communicates to the listener is, okay, well, I think I'm in a harmful situation. He says get out of harm's way, so I should get out of this. Oh, but this example he just gave of what he is talking about, that sounds an awful lot like my marriage. So
I guess I'm not in harm's way.
I'm not exempt.
Yeah.
And he talks about how we can't make exemptions for ourselves, except for in these specific situations that he's mentioned. And that's the problem.
And that's a classic example of gaslighting. These entire sermons are gaslighting people. And what he's really saying is, if you think he's abusive, he's not. He's honorable. You know, if you think he's abusive, he's not. It's part of the crazy cycle. You need to ask, what did you do to make him feel disrespected? It just really needs to stop. Now he's going to claim, I never said that he was going to hit her.
The thing is that exactly. And he's going to say, of course I don't condone abuse. But the thing is that you need to think about the fact that some people in your audience are being abused. And you need to say things thinking about that and thinking about how they might interpret it.
Because the only time he mentions people in the audience who thought they were being abused, he did it like, oh, I'm not going to believe it. Like, he did it with that voice.
And again, it doesn't matter what he said in other pieces of work. It doesn't matter the general message you try to get across in everything you do. What matters is specific messages, because I haven't read all of Emerson Eggerichs' blog posts. Most people probably haven't read all of his blog posts or read all of his books, read all of his blog posts, and seen all of the videos that he puts out, and you can't expect them to. Your advice on its own should not be harmful. If a tree falls in the woods and no one is around to hear it, does it clarify Emerson Eggerichs' stance on abuse and narcissism?
Okay, enough of these sermons. I just really wanted to go through them again, because we did have to take the one video down.
You decided to take it down.
Yes, because I decided not to contest the copyright takedown notice. And I decided that, you know what, I'll just let that video go down and we will just do a longer critique so people see what the problems really are.
To recap, Emerson Eggerichs says, get out of harm's way. If your husband needs to walk away from a dispute with you so you don't get hit, you're in harm's way. If your husband tries to strangle you because he gets heated in the moment, you are in harm's way, and you deserve to get out.
And we really should not have to explain that. And the fact that Houston's First Baptist Church had these sermons and they never gave any caveats afterwards is really problematic. And churches, if you have guest speakers who say stuff like this, you need to then go to your congregation the next week and tell them that was wrong. And here's how we want to support abuse victims in our church. I did phone and email Houston's First Baptist. I only heard about this sermon because people at Houston's First Baptist sent it to me and told me this is really problematic. I don't know what to do. So I phoned and I emailed Houston's First Baptist and they never got back to me. And Emerson Eggerichs just simply wants us not to talk about this.
It seems to me that in the church, we would rather pretend like abuse doesn't happen than actually do the work of making it stop happening. And that is a terrible tragedy. And we really need to do better, church.
Yeah. And I just want to say now, they may try to take this video down. And so I want this as part of this video. Fair use usually has 4 different criteria as to whether or not something constitutes fair use. This video that we have just done and this podcast that we have just done falls under the first category. And I want to read it to you. The purpose and character of the use, including whether such use is of commercial nature or is for nonprofit educational purposes. And it says courts typically focus on whether the use of copyright protected material is transformative. This means whether the use adds new expression or meaning to the original material or whether it merely copies. We are not copying, we are critiquing, and you are allowed to do that. And then later on, I think this is the third one, it says the amount and substantiality of the portion used in relation to the copyrighted work as a whole. Borrowing small bits of material from an original work is more likely to be considered fair use than borrowing large portions, and we just took small portions. Now, fair use is decided on a case-by-case basis. So if they decide to go after this video, which they still may, I just want to say that we will fight it. And we have an army of people on our side. And we have probably over 1,000 stories now of women who say that their marriages got worse and that the abuse got worse after they went through the Love and Respect program or read Love and Respect. And if a copyright takedown notice is put against this video, we will bring all those women onto our side and we will get so many more. The best way to get us to stop critiquing Emerson Eggerichs and other authors who are saying terrible things about women is to stop saying terrible things about women. Like, if you want us to stop this, just apologize for what you said. You probably didn't mean it the way it came across. So just admit that you were wrong, put out an apology, and everything will be fine. But don't try to silence us because the church needs to hear that this is not okay. I do want to read one more thing, and I'm going to actually get Connor to read this. This is a review of The Great Sex Rescue. And before we go, I just want to say again, The Great Sex Rescue looks at a lot of the faulty teaching that is in so many of our evangelical books, shows how it hurts women's sexual and marital satisfaction, but also shows how we can get beyond that and how we can actually build healthy sex lives, which are mutual, intimate, and pleasurable for both, which I think is the godly and biblical model. We've had so many amazing reviews come through on Amazon, and I just want to end this podcast with one from a guy, because a lot of guys are reading it, so why don't you read it in a guy's voice?
All right. Let me get my best guy's voice on here. I first started reading this book because my wife had read it, and she was very excited about it. I was slightly leery about it because I figured it was written by women for women, and that it might just be another book biased against the male gender, just telling the men stop being pigs, honor women, love them the way that women want to be honored and loved. I was surprised and encouraged to see that this is a book not just rescuing sex for women, but rescuing sex for couples, both men and women. The authors are not against men, they're against abuse. As a man, I was glad to see the dignity and hope with which the authors treat both genders, and how the authors root for men just as much as they root for women. His book does more to honor and respect men as human beings created in the image of God, and not just animals with a physical need, than many other Christian books out there. As a man, I never really gave much thought to the message that women were receiving through Christian books and teachings. The typical things I heard growing up, such as, don't ever say no to your husband, etc. While I don't hold to these teachings, I never considered how these teachings might affect the other gender. After reading this book, I would like to say, I never realized, and I am so very sorry to all of my Christian sisters and women in general for the way in which they have been seen or not seen and treated regarding their bodies and their sexuality. I was appalled and horrified at some of the advice given in other Christian sex books and the effect it's had on Christian women. This book is a book of biblical hope and encouragement. It attempts to rescue teachings about men, women, and sex, and it does a fantastic job doing just that.
I thought that was so amazing, because that's honestly what we wanted. You know,
Absolutely.
we are not man bashers. We love men. We just simply want everyone to be healthy, and we want to call the church to more.
Yeah.
So whether it's about bouncing your eyes, it's not normal to have to bounce your eyes and to always see women with lust. We can do better. It's not normal to always be angry and have to walk away. We can do better. Let's call people to the fruits of the Spirit, to what it is like when Jesus is in your life. And let's not set up these strange things about what masculinity is. And then I think church will end up doing better. So thank you for joining us on the Bare Marriage Podcast. We appreciate your support. Please check out our Patreon, patreon.com/Bare Marriage. I will put the link in the YouTube box and in the podcast description for this podcast. And check out the Connor's post if you want to send it to people. It was yesterday's post. I will also put the link to it. And please keep supporting us. We are getting a lot of pushback behind the scenes. We're here to stand up for you. And so we are going to do that. We are not going to back down.
Keep Sheila and the team in your prayers.
Yeah, because this isn't easy. This really is not easy. So thank you for being here, and we will see you the last Thursday of April and every other Thursday for the regular podcast too. Bye-bye.
Bye.